Good morning. It is May 10th, 2019. My name is Matthew Ogden, and you are watching our Friday broadcast here, weekly broadcast from LaRouchePAC.com. Obviously, much has happened over the past several weeks, and we are watching history unfold very rapidly in front of us. But as this day begins, the question which is on everybody's mind is a very important one, a very relevant question. Whether the future of the United States and China. What will be the outcome of the historic U.S.-China trade talks that lasted late into last night, early into this morning, and are continuing as we speak today? An extremely high-level Chinese delegation is currently in Washington as we speak, including the Chinese Vice Premier Li He. And while tensions are very high, with tariffs on Chinese goods set to rise to 25% in the absence of an agreement between the U.S. and China. Actually, those tariffs rose at 12:01 this morning. But the Chinese are then threatening to retaliate with tariffs of the same reciprocal sort. As these tensions overhang the entire environment of this meeting, there is a sense of opportunity as President Trump, at the very same time, continues to emphasize that a positive relationship between the United States and China would be a good thing and not a bad thing. And he celebrates his personal relationship with Chinese President Xi Jinping. This relationship was forged during President Trump's state visit plus a year ago to China, which you see pictured in this image here. And President Trump has continued to come back to this personal relationship with President Xi, despite the tensions around the so-called trade war and so forth. In a news conference yesterday, President Trump said that he had received what he called a, quote, very beautiful letter from President Xi Jinping, which Trump summarized as saying, quote, let's work together, let's see if we can get something done. And this reflects the continued theme on the level of Trump and Xi, that if these two leaders were to be allowed to do so, they would be able to forge a strong and mutually beneficial relationship between the United States and China, two of the greatest world powers on this planet. At the same time, however, there is an extraordinary tension on the strategic front. We heard Helga Tsepp-LaRouche discuss this in detail in her international webcast yesterday, but we just saw a little bit over a week ago the conclusion of the Belt and Road Forum in Beijing. This was the second Belt and Road Forum. The first of these happened 2 years ago. Helga Tsepp-LaRouche herself was in attendance. This one occurred on April 25th through 27th in Beijing, with 150 nations participating, and we are clearly seeing that these nations are beginning to realize that participating in this new paradigm of cooperation with the win-win development perspective, which has been promoted by the Belt and Road, they see that this is clearly in both their immediate and their long-term self-interest. And indeed, the United States joining and working in parallel with this global development plan of China would certainly be in the win-win self-interest of both of these two great powers, the United States and China. And not only that, it would mean the end of the era of British colonialism and geopolitics. But at the same time, you have this moment of great promise. You have the geopolitical neocon faction, the same grouping that you remember from the 1980s, 1990s, all the way up till today. This same faction and many of the same people, including several persons within the Trump administration, such as Pompeo and Bolton, they are dead set on containing the Belt and Road and preventing the development and the rise of China. They've even gone so far as to refound the so-called Committee on the Present Danger. You have Pompeo in Great Britain this week, delivering the Margaret Thatcher Memorial Lecture, excoriating China as the leading adversary and villain of the world, and celebrating the so-called U.S.-UK special relationship. While at the same time, you have the President of the United States, supposedly Pompeo's boss, continuing to celebrate his relationship with President Xi Jinping and publicly accusing British intelligence of spying on him and attempting to undermine and overthrow his presidency in what President Trump has correctly called an attempted coup. This administration is full of such contradictions. But you still have this very powerful faction attempting to ignite a showdown between the United States and China and continuing to embrace a long, outdated Cold War mode of thinking. This ideology is an extremely dangerous one, especially between two leading thermonuclear powers. And this ideology threatens to exacerbate the economic and strategic tensions between the United States and China, leading to what has been characterized as a Thucydides trap, a reference to the Peloponnesian War between the two great powers of the Mediterranean at that time, Athens and Sparta. However, even the belief in such a dynamic itself is a reflection of the same imperial geopolitical thinking which has brought us to this point. This type of thinking must be completely tossed out, and as Helga LaRouche has repeatedly stated, we must replace geopolitics with an entirely new paradigm of international relations, making a clean break with the past in a dramatic fashion, as dramatic a fashion as the Renaissance differed from the Dark Ages. It's time for the President of the United States to overthrow the geopolitical chessboard and declare that he will no longer act according to the so-called rules of the game, an action which this president is clearly very amenable to. Perhaps to make another classical allusion to ancient Greece, we must cut the Gordian knot of the narrow, petty, national self-interest which is defined by these predetermined strategic and economic parameters which have been put into place by this British imperial system. And this can only be done by embracing a completely new idea, overthrowing the old axioms and creating a new idea of win-win relations between the great powers of this planet, including the United States and China, for the mutual benefit of each and all, or as President Xi Jinping very rightly calls it, a shared destiny for mankind. Now, where do we find such a solution? Well, we need look no further than the life work of Lyndon LaRouche. In a speech which Lyndon LaRouche delivered exactly 22 years ago today, on May 10th, 1997, in a conference in Washington, D.C., under the auspices of FDR PAC, Lyndon LaRouche laid out a strategy for those two superpowers, the United States and China, to join with each other and to join with other sovereign nations and to put the reigning monetarist system into bankruptcy reorganization, and to replace it with a new financial architecture grounded not in monetarist speculation, but in real physical productivity and development. Now, what's eerie when you view this speech, which was delivered 22 years ago today, is to remember that when LaRouche proposed this idea, 1997, the forces to put it into effect did not exist to do so. China was still a relatively poor and undeveloped nation with a huge percentage of its population still in poverty, although it was moving in the direction of what we've now seen it emerge as the second, if not first, leading economic power of this planet. But that was still in nascent form. And at that time also, 1997, the United States presidency was weak and under siege. As a layman, attending that speech in 1997 and hearing what LaRouche had to say, you might have been incredulous. You might have said, the forces simply do not exist to carry out this plan. And you might have thought, well, this sounds very good, but this is merely pie in the sky, but it will never be brought to pass. The kind of cynicism of the present, which people say, well, present parameters will never change, therefore this cannot be brought to pass. But now, as we reflect on the 22 years that have passed subsequently, everything has changed dramatically. And this idea is a very real one as we speak. China has lifted almost its entire population out of poverty and is on track to finish that job. It has now become a leading space power. The Belt and Road, an idea which was originally founded in the concept of the New Silk Road, or the so-called Eurasian Land Bridge, which Lyndon and Helga LaRouche championed going back all the way to the early 1990s, and really grew out of an idea which they had conceptualized in the late 1980s. This Belt and Road policy, which has now been embraced by China, is already bringing development to formerly desperate and formerly colonial areas of the world, including significant parts of Africa and elsewhere. And in the United States, despite nearly 2 years of an attempted coup against his presidency, we have a president, President Trump, who has continued to stand by his expressed desire to work with China and to work with Russia and to end this reigning era of strategic confrontation and embrace a new great powers relationship to resolve the world's toughest challenges. And despite all the friction and pushback and opposition within his own administration and his own cabinet, that commitment is still a richly deserving cause for optimism. As you watch this speech by Lyndon LaRouche, again, 22 years ago today, reflect on how prescient this vision was and reflect on how much has changed due largely to the work of Lyndon LaRouche and his associates to make this vision now a real possibility, and reflect on what must continue to be done to bring these world leaders together around Lyndon LaRouche's economic policies.
There are only two nations which are respectable left on this planet. That is, nations of respectable power. That is the United States, particularly the United States, not as represented by the Congress, but by the President. It is the identity of the United States which is a political power, not some concatenation of its parts. The United States is represented today only by its President as a political institution. The Congress does not represent the United States. They're not quite sure who they do represent these days, since they haven't visited their voters recently. The President is institutionally the embodiment of the United States in international relations. The State Department can't do that. The Justice Department can't do it. No other department can do it. Only the President of the United States under our Constitution can represent the United States as an entity. Its entire personality, its true interest, its whole people. Now, there's only one other power on this planet which can be so insolent as that toward other powers, and that's the Republic of China. Now, China is engaged presently in a great infrastructure building project in which my wife and others have had an ongoing engagement over some years. There's a great reform in China, which is a troubled reform. They're trying to solve a problem. That doesn't mean there is no problem. But they're trying to solve it. Therefore, if the United States, so the President of the United States and China, participate in fostering that project, sometimes called the Silk Road Project, sometimes the Land Bridge Project. If that project of developing development corridors across Eurasia, into Africa, into North America, is extended, that project is enough work to put this whole planet into an economic revival. And I'll get into just a bit of that to make it more sensuously concrete to you. Now, China has had cooperation with the government of Iran for some time. Iran has actually been completing a number of rail links which are an extension of China's land bridge program, our Silk Road project. More recently, we've had on the side of India, from Indian leadership, which has met with the representatives of China, to engage in an additional route among the land routes for the land bridge program. One goes into Kunming in China. Where I was in that area was in Mishinau during the part of World War II, and we were out of Mishinau. We had planes flying into Kunming, over the hump, as they used to say in those days. Quite familiar with that area. But if you have water connections, canal connections, and rail connections from Kunming through Mishinau, that area, across Bangladesh, into India, across to Pakistan, into Iran, up to the area just above Tehran, south of the Caspian. You have linked to the Middle East, you have linked to Central Asia, you have linked to Turkey, you have linked to Europe. Then you have a northern route, which is pretty much the route of the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which is built under American influence and American advice by Russia. You have a middle route, which is being developed in Central Asia with China and Iran. India is working on a plan which involves only a few hundreds of kilometers of rail to be added. There are a lot of other improvements along the right-of-way, which would link the area north of Tehran through Pakistan, through India, through Bangladesh, through Myanmar, into Kunming, into Thailand, into Vietnam, down through Malaysia and Singapore, across the straits by a great bridge, into Indonesia. There's a plan also for the development of a rail link through what was northern Siberia, across the Bering Straits, into Alaska, and down into the United States. There's a Middle East link, of several links, from Europe as well as from China, but from China, Middle East link into Egypt, into all of Africa. So that what we have here is a set of projects which are not just transportation projects like the transcontinental railroads of the United States, which was the precedent for this idea back in the late 1860s and 1870s. But you have development corridors where you develop on an area of 50 to 70 kilometers either side of your rail link, your pipeline, so forth. You develop this area with industry, with mining, with all these kinds of things, which is the way you pay for a transportation link. Because of all the rich economic activity, every few kilometers of distance along this link, there's something going on, some economic activity. People working, people building things, people doing things. To transform this planet in great projects of infrastructure building, which will give you the great industries, the new agriculture, and the other things we desperately need. There is no need for anybody on this planet who's able to work to be out of work. That's simple. And that project is the means. If the nations which agree with China, which now includes Russia, Iran, India, other nations, if they engage in a commitment to that project, which they're building every day, if the United States, that is the President of the United States, Clinton, continues to support that effort as he's been doing, at least politically, then what do you have? You have the United States and China and a bunch of other countries ganged up together against the greatest power on this planet, which is the British Empire, called the British Commonwealth. That's the enemy. And if on one bright day, say a Sunday morning after a weekend meeting, the President of the United States, the President of China, and a few other people say, we have determined this weekend, based on our advisors and the facts, that the international financial and monetary system is hopelessly bankrupt. And we, in our responsibility as heads of state, must put these bankrupt institutions into bankruptcy reorganization in the public interest. And it is in our interest to cooperate as nations in doing this, to avoid creating chaos on this planet. The result then is that such an announcement on a bright Sunday morning will certainly spin the talking heads on Washington TV. But otherwise, it means that the entire system is of that moment has been put through the guillotine and the head is rolling down the street. Alan Greenspan's head, perhaps. That means we have at that point the impetus for building immediately a new financial and monetary system. Now, in putting a corporation which is bankrupt into viable form, what do? You've got to find the business that it's going to do, which is the basis for creating the new credit to get that firm going again. The Land Bridge program, with its implications on a global scale, is the great project which spins off directly and indirectly enough business, so to speak, for every part of this world to get this world back on a sound basis again.
Impressions of that speech, May 10th, 1997, which might have seemed almost far-fetched at the time, but think about how actually plausible that idea is under the current circumstances, literally as we speak on this very day. Could this be the weekend that Lyndon LaRouche was talking about, when the United States president and the president of China take the world by surprise and announce a new international economic order? Not necessarily the case, but if we do our work, this is what could be the reality. Imagine this, just as you heard LaRouche just say. If on one bright day, say a Sunday morning, after a weekend meeting, the President of the United States, the President of China, and a few other people say, quote, "We have determined this weekend, based on our advisors and the facts, that the international financial and monetary system is hopelessly bankrupt, and we, in our responsibility as heads of state, must put these bankrupt institutions into bankruptcy reorganization in the public interest, and it is in our interest to cooperate as nations in doing this, to avoid creating chaos on this planet. The result is, as LaRouche said, that such an announcement on a bright Sunday morning will certainly spin the talking heads on Washington TV. And that means we have at that point the impetus for building immediately a new financial and monetary system. The Land Bridge program, with its implications on a global scale, is the great project which spins off directly and indirectly enough business, so to speak, for every part of this world to get this world back on a sound basis again. That could be this weekend if President Trump chose to do so. That very meeting could take place, that very announcement could occur. And we know that Xi Jinping has certainly shown that he's amenable to such an idea. But it is this vision of a new international economic order that the President of the United States so desperately needs. He needs to understand this perspective. Only if the presidency of this republic, of the United States, can be liberated from the decades of geopolitical ideology and the straitjacket of continuing British imperial strategic thinking, only then can the United States fully take advantage of this extraordinary moment of history. And President Trump cannot do this on his own. He needs the guidance of a thinker of the sort of Lyndon LaRouche, who spent his entire career preparing the groundwork and the ideas for the solutions for this present moment of history. This moment of history is exactly what Lyndon LaRouche spent his career preparing these ideas for. Go all the way back to the beginning of the 1970s, when Lyndon LaRouche launched the campaign for a new international economic order, what he called an international development bank, and put together the development program for every continent, practically every nation on this planet. Worked for 40, 45, 50 years to bring that into effect, to bring together people of goodwill from all over the world around this vision. And that is exactly what was created as the solution for this moment in history. That is what President Trump needs. As Helga LaRouche stated in the introduction to her class in the ongoing class series, which is taking place now on Lyndon LaRouche's life and works, she said, "Only if the name of LaRouche is cleared from the decades of lies and slanders that were published about him in the mainstream media and elsewhere. Only then will the American people have unfettered access to the body of his ideas. A memorial celebration is taking place for Lyndon LaRouche on June 8th, exactly 1 month from tomorrow. This period of rapid change over the course of the next 4 weeks is the opportunity to bring LaRouche's ideas into effect in an unprecedented way. A campaign is now underway to exonerate Lyndon LaRouche, and a pamphlet will be released just in the next few days. It is currently at the press being printed, and this pamphlet is being published under the title Restoring the Soul of America, the Exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche. And as the introduction to that pamphlet states, to fully exonerate the name of Lyndon LaRouche is to fully act on and implement his ideas. The responsibility now lies on the American people to correct the record of history and to decide to fully honor and act upon the legacy of this great American. And what better time to do so than this weekend? Thank you very much, and please stay tuned to LaRouchePAC.com.